The topic of the last dragon in Westeros is actually a lot more complex than it first seems. While the history books and accounts of the maesters seem to have a clear answer, when you dig a little deeper, it's much more complicated than it first appears. In fact, given the endpoint of Fire and Blood and the vagueness of A World of Ice and Fire, unless George R. R. Martin does ever publish the second volume of Fire and Blood, picking up after the end of the regency of Aegon III, we will likely never officially know the true answer to this question. In this video, I will be looking at the state of play of House Targaryen and the few dragons they have left after the Dance of the Dragons, as well as looking at the idea there may have been dragons in Westeros for a long time after they officially became consigned to the dusty pages of history books. The Dance of the Dragons saw the loss of most of House Targaryen's dragons. Some, of course, were killed in battle, but most were killed during the Moon of Madness, with the riots stoked up by the Shepherd, leading to the destruction of the Dragon Pit and the dragons kept within. By the end of the Dance of the Dragons, we know of only 4 dragons left alive, with only one of them still under the control of House Targaryen, and that dragon was but a hatchling. One final dragon would hatch, born sometime during the reign of King Aegon III, but this dragon was small and stunted, with withered little wings, and died soon after in the year 153 AC. As far as records go, this unnamed hatchling was the last dragon, and we really know very little about it. However, there is some speculation that this so-called last dragon may have been poisoned or perhaps killed by maesters, or perhaps given his deep fear of dragons, King Aegon III himself. But there is a lot more to this. While yes, strictly speaking, this was the last known living dragon with its death in 153 AC, making them extinct. But given what we know of dragon lifespans, this might not actually have been the case at all. There might have very well been dragons in Westeros living past that point. Of the 4 dragons that survived the Dance of the Dragons, we know the fates of only one of them, Morning, who was hatched by Rhaena Targaryen towards the end of the war. After the regency, Morning was effectively the last dragon under the control of House Targaryen. Morning's scales were said to be a pale pink, but with black horns and a crest. As a hatchling, the dragon would travel everywhere with Rhaena coiled up on her shoulder. As it grew bigger, it began to make its lair in the ruins of the Dragon Pit. By the year 135 AC, Morning was big enough for Rhaena to ride. She would ride Morning everywhere, going further and further each time. While some, like Queen Daenerys, were delighted by the dragon, King Aegon III was terrified of it and would have nothing to do with it. He even went as far as forbidding Rhaena from flying upon Morning during their proposed royal progress planned for the year 136 AC. Rather, Rhaena returned to Dragonstone, where her and her dragon felt more welcome. History loses track of Morning after this, and we have no records, as of yet, of its fate until George R. R. Martin fills in the gaps with Fire and Blood Volume 2. But all we can say is that Morning was dead by the year 153, given this is when the history states the last dragon had died. Morning would have only been 22 years old at its death, still very young for a dragon if it made it to 153. Morning seemed like a perfectly healthy dragon, and growing fast like the long-gone dragons of House Targaryen. We have no record of a conflict in which Morning could have been lost, thus how Morning's end came, and when specifically it did, is a mystery. There is some fan speculation that given Rhaena would eventually marry into House Hightower, perhaps something befell Morning in Old Town, given the Grand Maester conspiracy theory and the proposed role they had in the death of the dragons. So it would make sense, but we have nowhere near enough proof to really say. Then we have Sheepstealer, one of the wild Dragonstone dragons, who is claimed by the dragonseed Nettles during the sowing of the dragon seeds. She used sheep to gain Sheepstealer's trust over time before getting to the point where she could claim it. I find Sheepstealer the most interesting of the wild dragons, given how Nettles is able to claim it via a very alternative method. There is a lot of speculation about how Nettles was able to do this, or if she even had any Valyrian ancestry at all. At the end of the dance, Nettles and Sheepstealer are in the Riverlands with Prince Daemon. Prior to Daemon facing Aemon One-Eye at Harrenhal, Queen Rhaenyra named Nettles a traitor along with the other dragon seeds. Nettles leaves Maidenpool with Sheepstealer early in the morning after feeding it a large black ram. The dragon and its rider were last seen flying over the bare crabs in the direction of the Vale. So what happened to Nettles and Sheepstealer, and can a case be made that it's possible that Sheepstealer could have been the last living dragon, surviving past 153 AC, when Aegon II Targaryen regained the Iron Throne after Rhaenyra's death. There were reports that Sheepstealer had been seen at Cracklaw Point and the Mountains of the Moon. In 134 AC, during the reign of King Aegon III, Sir Robert Rowan led the royal army to the Vale to support Sir Joffrey Arryn's claim to the Eyrie. Robert's men supposedly encountered Sheepstealer and a ragged Nettles in a cave, and in the ensuing fight 16 men were slain and 70 more were wounded. Nettles and her dragon were last seen flying deeper into the Mountains of the Moon. An offshoot clan of the Painted Dogs in the Vale came to worship a fire witch, to whom they would send their boys with gifts for her. In exchange, they would face the flames of her dragon to prove their manhood. This offshoot clan was considered to be one of the most savage of the mountain clans, and the stories are still told of this fire witch to this day. Some of the maesters of the Seven Kingdoms believed this practice was the origin of the tradition held nowadays by the Burned Men, where young men must give some part of their body to the fire to prove their courage to be a man. So it appears from this information we have that Nettles and Sheepstealer lived out their days in the Vale. We don't know how Sheepstealer finally died, but given we know its rough age, given Sheepstealer was said to have hatched early in the reign of King Jaehaerys, it is very possible it outlived Nettles and could very well have lived past 153 AC, given that if Sheepstealer died a natural death, which seems likely, given we have no reports of it again after 134, it could very easily have lived another 22 years, making it past 153 AC. Given we know how long dragons can live naturally, with Balerion the Black Dread dying of natural causes at the age of 200, gives us some indication of how long Sheepstealer could have lived for. So while we do lose track of Sheepstealer, it is very possible that even if Nettles didn't live that long, that Sheepstealer could have lived beyond 153 AC, thus making it the last living dragon. The other wild dragon that lived past the Dance of the Dragons was the one left unclaimed during the sowing of the dragon seeds, Cannibal. From what sources we have, we know he was the oldest and largest of the wild dragons, around the size of Vermithor, who had hatched around the year 34 AC, so it is possible he was around the same age as Vermithor. Given that he went unclaimed during the war, means he did make it to the end of the dance. The last reported sighting of Cannibal was possibly in 132 AC, during the burial at sea of Lord Corlys Velaryon. Cannibal supposedly flew over the deceased as a salute, but some sources claim this was an embellishment added in after the fact, when the histories were finally written down. Regardless, after the end of the dance, the dragon vanished and was never seen again. Given it would likely have been the largest dragon alive at this point, it's hard to imagine he was killed by another dragon, unless there is more wild ones we don't know of yet. Some suggested that he flew back to Essos, or perhaps even Valyria, but we have no way of knowing this. Given he could have hatched around the year 34 AC, by 132, at his reported last sighting, he would only have been 98 years of age. So given by 153, he would have been 119 years old. If he remained hidden like Sheepstealer, it's very possible he could have lived past 153 AC, if the age of Balerion the Black Dread is anything to go by. There is a solution to this, however. There were some small folk on Dragonstone that claim that Cannibal is in fact much older than we think, and that he was on Dragonstone long before the arrival of House Targaryen there in 114 BC, meaning, if this theory is correct, he was never a Targaryen dragon in the first place. But if we say, for example, he was hatched around 114 BC, by 132 AC, it would make him 246 years old, meaning if he did die of old age in 132 AC, it would explain why he just disappeared. However, as Maester Monkin points out, given his size in 132, it seems impossible that the idea of him being a pre-doomed dragon is a stretch. Now, the final dragon we know for sure existed is, for me personally, the most interesting, given its history. Silverwing, the mount of good Queen Alysanne, and then the dragon seed Off-White during the Dance of the Dragons. According to legend, Silverwing hatched from a dragon's egg that had been placed in Alysanne Targaryen's cradle by her sister, Rhaena, in 36 AC. I love how well travelled Silverwing and Alysanne were together, being, as far as we know, the only members of House Targaryen before Maester Aemon to travel to the Wall. But it's not just that. Just like Alysanne and Jaehaerys' close relationship. Their dragons, Silverwing and Vermithor, also seemed to mirror them, with this being a cornerstone in many of the theories about the exact nature of a bond between a dragon and a rider. If the dragon can influence how a rider feels, can a rider influence a dragon? During the Dance of the Dragons, Silverwing was claimed by the Dragon Seat of White and took part in the horrific battles at Tumbleton late into the war, which saw several dragon deaths, including that of Vermithor. During the Second Battle of Tumbleton, Off-White was unable to reach Silverwing, who was in a field outside the town. During the battle, some crossbowmen did take a few pot shots at the dragon, who was circling the battlefield. She descended only again the next day, after the sun had gone down, and landed between the slain Vermithor, Seasmoke, and Tessarion. The singers claim that Silverwing attempted to lift Vermithor's wing on 3 occasions, but Archmaester Gildane considers this most likely to have been a fable. When the sun rose again, Silverwing began to fly listlessly across the field, where she fed on burned carcasses of men and animals. Silverwing's rider Off-White insisted he should become the new king of the Seven Kingdoms, as Aegon II at this time was missing, and Prince Aemond and Daeron had died. When the Hobbit Hightower of the Bloody Caltrops gave Off-the-White poison and wine, Silverwing became riderless once again. Lord Unwin Peake offered 1,000 golden dragons to any knight of noble birth able to claim Silverwing. Out of the 3 men who came forth, the first man had his arm torn off and the second burned to death. The third man then changed his mind. Silverwing became a wild dragon during the reign of King Aegon III Targaryen and made her lair on a small island in the middle of Red Lake in the northwest of the Reach. When seeking a new dragon to replace his dead Sunfire, Aegon II rejected Lord Boros Baratheon's suggestion of Silverwing, as he was too weak to travel across the war-torn country to Red Lake, or even to mount a grown dragon. All that is known of Silverwing after this is she continued living at Red Lake during the regency of King Aegon III Targaryen. There is no indication how she died, or even if she actually did. Given she was born in 36 AC, she would have been 95 years old at the end of the Dance of the Dragons. With the claim that the last dragon died in 153 AC, Silverwing would have been 117 at this time, and given what we know of dragons' natural lifespans, it's entirely possible Silverwing could have lived past this supposed last dragon. However, I do think it's fair to point out that if a dragon the size of Silverwing was still alive at this point, there would likely have been some kind of report of her, or a historical account. I believe this is one of the things that George R. R. Martin will touch upon if we ever get Fire and Blood Part 2. However, until we get more information, it's entirely possible Silverwing lived past 153 AC and could be the last dragon. So who was the last dragon? Well, officially it's the unnamed malformed last dragon that died in the year 153 AC during the reign of King Aegon III. However, it is entirely possible that until we find out more information, the Sheepstealer and Silverwing outlived 153 AC and were the last living dragons. In terms of Morning, it's much more complicated given how little we know of the later life of Rhaena Targaryen, and thus of Morning, but given this dragon had a rider who was the half-sister of the king, I think that if it was the last living dragon, we would know about it. Thus I suspect Morning died somehow before 153, and it's something like the fate of Silverwing that might be touched upon in more detail in Fire and Blood Volume 2. Now I think on the balance of probability, that if Cannibal was a pre-Targaryen dragon, that he did in fact die of old age in 132 AC, but if he is much younger, as other sources suggest, then much like Silverwing and Sheepstealer, his fate is much more of a mystery. Some have speculated that these dragons just eventually left Westeros of their own accord, hence why there is no mention of them by 153 AC. But for me, whatever the answer to this question is, it highlights another reason why I hope that at some point we do get a Fire and Blood Volume 2 to fill in the huge gaps in the lore during the Targaryen era post Dance of the Dragons. Yes, we have the world of Ice and Fire. There is so much overlooked and missing from it. Winds of Winter and hopefully finishing A Song of Ice and Fire is certainly on top of George R. R. Martin's list of projects. But I do hope, as many have speculated, that Fire and Blood Volume 2 was already written around the same time as Part 1, but won't be published until after the possible release of The Winds of Winter. But who knows when it comes to George R. R. Martin's timelines at this point. We'll just have to wait and see.